When the Starliner Space Capsule blasted off last June, it was set to be an 8-day mission. But now, astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams will be stuck in space until next February.
Well, they should have been back on Earth weeks ago, but two NASA astronauts are still unable to leave the International Space Station. Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams launched aboard Boeing's new Starliner Space Capsule over a month ago.
Could astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams be trapped in space until next February? Their mission on the Starliner Space Capsule, meant to last just 8 days, now faces critical issues like helium leaks and broken thrusters, forcing them to stay nearly 8 months. As NASA scrambles for help, only SpaceX can step in, but not until late February. What hidden dangers are waiting out there? Let us expose what these astronauts have seen, what most astronauts only live in their worst nightmares. The Boeing space dilemma. When the Starliner Space Capsule launched last June, it was supposed to be an 8-day mission. But now astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams are looking at staying in space until next February, turning their trip into an 8-month challenge. Are they stuck? It's hard to say, but their spacecraft has run into serious trouble, including helium leaks and problems with the thrusters. These issues have put Boeing, the company that made the craft, in a difficult position. Because of this, NASA has reached out to SpaceX, owned by Elon Musk, for help. However, SpaceX can't provide assistance until February 20th. As weeks pass, Wilmore and Williams, with dwindling supplies, receive a chilling radio message. NASA prioritizes safety above all else, a commitment clearly reflected in their handling of unexpected mission extensions. This ethos is vividly embodied in the experience of Captain Butch Wilmore, whose mission was initially planned as a short journey, but has since expanded in duration. Darren, Captain Wilmore's daughter, remains optimistic despite the unforeseen challenges. According to her, the situation aboard the spacecraft is far from disastrous. The crew has access to ample food supplies, and they keep spirits high by performing flips in zero gravity, turning a difficult situation into an opportunity for some lighthearted fun. Communication with Earth remains robust. Captain Wilmore's wife and daughter maintain daily contact with him, while Darren catches up with her father every other day. Her admiration for him is profound. She sees him as a hero, a figure of strength and resilience, qualities that shine even brighter during this prolonged space venture. But that's not the end of the story. The extended time in space also means more challenges ahead for the crew and for NASA. Imagine floating through the vastness of space, far away from Earth. For many kids and adults, becoming an astronaut is a dream job, but for one astronaut, that dream turned into a real-life nightmare. He ended up stranded alone in the endless expanse of space, facing a situation few could imagine. This is the amazing story of his journey. It takes us through the fall of empires and even touches on the strange idea of bending time. At the center of it all is an astronaut who spent 311 days completely alone in space. Our story begins with the race to explore space. We start in the Soviet Union, in what is now Russia. Sergei Krikala was born on August 27, 1958, in the city known back then as Leningrad, now called St. Petersburg. As a child, he was inspired by the fierce competition between the Soviet Union and the United States to explore space, a rivalry born from the Cold War tensions in the mid-20th century. This race wasn't just a simple contest. It was a battle to prove which country could achieve the most in space exploration. Despite the intense rivalry, he never lost sight of his dream of becoming an astronaut. He worked hard to make this dream come true, and in 1981, he earned a degree in mechanical engineering from the Leningrad Mechanical Institute. After graduation, he got a job at NPO Energia, the Russian organization in charge of human spaceflight for the Soviet space program. In his early career, he was involved in testing space equipment and took on an important role in ground control for space missions. He played a key role on the ground team during a mission in 1985 to rescue the Salyut 7 space station after it suffered a major failure. He successfully directed the remote repairs of the station's control systems. These efforts led to his selection for cosmonaut training. The training was tough. He had to learn all about space science, including astronomy, how things move in space, and different scientific techniques. After completing this demanding program, he officially became a cosmonaut in 1986. As the spaceship soared through the vast expanse of space, he, clad in his official gear, proudly bore the title of cosmonaut. This title, reserved for those trained by the Russian Space Agency, echoed a profound meaning: sailor of the universe. The designation distinguished him from astronauts, a term more commonly used in the West. Each time he embarked on a journey beyond the Earth's atmosphere, he carried the legacy of a long line of explorers who had ventured into the cosmos under the same noble banner. The word cosmonaut not only marked his training and origin, but also highlighted a unique path of exploration, one rich with tradition and the spirit of discovery. As he glided through the cosmic ocean, he was more than just a traveler. He was a continuation of a storied history, navigating the infinite sea of stars. Sergei was ready for his next space mission, not knowing the challenges ahead. A cosmonaut's tale. In early 1988, Sergei began preparing for his first long mission on the Mir space station. At that time, Mir was the largest human-made object orbiting Earth. The main goal of Mir was to study how space affects the human body and to carry out scientific research, like observing the Earth from above. On November 26, 1988, he was ready to head to Mir on the Soyuz TM-7 mission, a collaborative project involving both French and Soviet astronauts. This was just the start of what would become a historic and very challenging adventure in space. The mission ended 151 days later, on April 27, 1989. He had handled everything smoothly and was already excited about his next trip into space. He felt a deep desire to explore more, driven by his endless curiosity about the universe. But what he didn't realize was that his next mission would make him long for the safety of Earth. By the end of 1990, he was getting ready for another launch. He had been chosen to join the crew of the Soyuz TM-12 mission, preparing for his second adventure into the unknown. On May 18, 1991, he arrived at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, a famous launch site that had sent some of the first rockets into space. At Baikonur, he teamed up with Anatoly Artsebarsky, an experienced Ukrainian commander, and Helen Sharman, the first astronaut from Britain. This place, now located in Kazakhstan, was full of space history. It was the launch site for incredible events like the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, and Yuri Gagarin's historic journey into space in 1961. His next mission was expected to be relatively simple, at least by space travel standards. But little did he know, in 311 days, he would be remembered as one of the most notable travelers from Baikonur. If he had been a superstitious man, he might have felt that this journey was going to be filled with difficulties. As their spacecraft approached the Mir space station after 2 days of travel, their targeting system failed. Suddenly, he found himself needing to dock the spacecraft manually, a job usually done by automated systems that guide and connect the spacecraft while keeping it in orbit. Manual docking is filled with danger. Even the smallest mistake could lead to disaster. However, he, always calm under pressure, managed to dock successfully. The Mir station, built to accommodate up to 6 people, usually only had 3 on board due to its limited space. Despite the tight quarters, it was their home in the vastness of space. Every day on the space station, the crew saw 16 sunrises and sunsets. This meant they had to cover the windows to make it dark enough to sleep. The cosmonauts usually woke up at 8 in the morning, according to Moscow time, to start their day. Their routine involved doing scientific experiments and taking care of the station. By 1 in the afternoon, they gathered in a common area for lunch and then exercise. Exercise was a key part of their day because the weak gravity in space could cause their muscles to weaken quickly. In fact, astronauts could lose as much as 20% of their muscle mass during missions, lasting just a few days. After lunch and their first workout, the cosmonauts worked for another 3 hours. Then they would exercise for another hour. The day ended with dinner and some free time, which many spent gazing at Earth through the windows. Life on the Mir space station was far from luxurious. Some people compared it to a famous fictional spaceship, the Millennium Falcon, both an amazing piece of engineering and a machine with many problems. Technical issues were common, like electrical malfunctions that made the lights flicker without warning. These problems constantly reminded the crew that they depended on equipment that wasn't always reliable. Life on the space station was tough, but bigger problems were coming. Life beyond Earth's atmosphere. But the flickering lights were not the worst part. These technical troubles also made the station's environment change quickly, with shifts in temperature and humidity that could encourage microorganisms to grow. And so life on the station was a constant battle against both boredom and the challenges of living in space. The space station was filled with a musty smell and the unmistakable scent of a space pilot who had been working hard. Mir had become like a college dorm room floating in space. But for Sergei, it felt like a second home. He loved the wide-open emptiness of space, his own playground for adventure. He enjoyed the feeling of weightlessness and had become an expert at moving through the station without gravity holding him down. He wasn't by himself. He had a great team around him. His friends Anatoly and Helen, along with two other cosmonauts who had been on Mir since the winter of 1990, were his close companions. On May 26, 1991, Helen and two of the team members finished their time in space and returned to Earth, leaving him and Anatoly to carry on with their important work. Their mission was planned to end in October 1991, giving them 5 more months of tasks to complete. One of the biggest parts of their extended stay was 6 spacewalks, where they would make important repairs and improvements to Mir. But during their last spacewalk, things got tricky. Anatoly's visor became fogged up, and his suit started to fail because there wasn't enough water. With Anatoly unable to see, he had to guide his commander back to the station. It was a close call, but they made it back just in time. But that wasn't the most surprising thing to happen. As August came and their mission was getting closer to its end, unexpected events started to unfold. From his spot in space, he could see the whole Earth. In just 90 minutes, he could fly over some of the most incredible places, from the pyramids in Egypt to the huge coral reefs in Australia, and even across the Grand Canyon in America. What he didn't know was that back on Earth, tanks were rolling across Red Square in Moscow. Big changes were happening at home. The Soviet Union, led by President Mikhail Gorbachev, was in a state of unrest. Gorbachev had introduced reforms to change the political and economic system. But since the 1980s, many people who supported the old ways were unhappy. By August 19, 1991, this unhappiness exploded into an attempt to overthrow Gorbachev. The coup attempt didn't last long, but it changed everything. It marked the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. With so much confusion back home, it was hard for him to get clear information. He was very worried about his family and friends caught up in all this turmoil. He relied on his wife, Yelena, who was working at Mission Control, and on amateur radio fans who could send him news. One of them, Margaret LaQuinto, an American who spoke Russian well, helped keep him updated on what was happening back home. He was completely confused by everything that was happening. He tried to understand what these events meant for the space program and his own part in it. He had no idea that he and the Mir space station would soon be swept up in the political chaos. As the last Soviet cosmonaut, he watched as more and more Soviet republics began to declare their independence from the Soviet Union. By the end of the year, most of them had claimed sovereignty. Kazakhstan was among the last, declaring its independence on December 16, 1991. This caused serious problems for the Soviet space program. Back on Earth, big changes were happening that would affect Sergei's mission. Sergei's extended mission, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the space launch site where Sergei had started his mission, was now under the control of Kazakhstan's new government. They were not eager to cooperate. Kazakhstan tried to charge huge fees for using the space facility, and Russia, struggling financially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, needed to find a solution fast. To calm the situation with Kazakhstan, the space agency in Moscow made a deal to include a Kazakhstani astronaut on the next mission to Mir. But this decision upset his plans. The inclusion of Tokhtar Obakirov, the Kazakhstani astronaut, meant that Alexander Kaleri, the original flight engineer, was removed from the mission. As a result, he was told that his stay on the Mir space station would be extended indefinitely. 3 new astronauts arrived at Mir on October 4th, led by Alexander Volkov, whom he had met before. 6 days later, 2 astronauts returned to Earth, and the command of the mission was handed over to Volkov. But this wasn't the worst part. By December 26, the Soviet Union had officially split into 15 independent countries, and Gorbachev had resigned. The organization that had been in charge of his mission no longer existed, and his situation became less of a priority. Now, with a Soviet passport that was no longer valid, he was left without any citizenship, watching from space as his homeland fell apart. He spent both Christmas and New Year in orbit, wondering if he would ever make it back to Earth. Although he found some comfort in the presence of his colleague, Commander Volkov, the extended time in space added even more pressure to Russia's financial problems. Things got so bad that the Russian Space Agency, renamed and struggling with money, could barely manage to send the necessary supplies to Mir, let alone a replacement for him. As the days went by, uncertainty grew. Would he make it back to Earth? Would there be a mission to bring him back? For now, he had no choice but to keep waiting among the stars. Every time he saw a shooting star, he silently wished for good news. He was worried about how staying in orbit for so long might affect his health. Even today, we don't know everything about the risks of spending long periods in space. But back in the 1990s, it was already clear that astronauts like him faced serious health challenges. One big problem was the increased exposure to the sun compared to being on Earth. This made him much more vulnerable to dangerous solar radiation, which could greatly increase his chances of developing severe eye issues or even cancer. Despite these frightening challenges, there was a way for him to come back to Earth, but it wasn't an easy choice. There was a Soyuz capsule on the Mir space station, ready for emergencies. The problem was, he was the last astronaut with the skills needed to keep the station running. If he chose to leave, the space station might have to be shut down for good. This left him in a difficult position, having to choose between his own health and his duty to his mission. Even with all the physical and emotional stress, his dedication to his work shone brighter than any star in the sky. He continued working tirelessly, keeping the Mir station functional for another 3 months. But this wasn't the worst part. His story could have ended with him lost in the vast emptiness of space, but it didn't. Help was on the way. In March 1992, Germany paid $24 million, allowing Klaus-Dietrich Flade to travel to Mir and become the first German in space. This payment finally enabled Russia to find a replacement for him, who had by then spent 10 long months in space, circling the Earth about 5,000 times. Sergei was finally going home, but things had changed. An exploration from Mir to Earth. Excited by the thought of returning home, Sergei began to look forward to stepping back on solid ground and being reunited with his loving wife and daughter. With the money from Germany, Russia's space agency prepared cosmonaut Alexander Kalary to take over from Sergei, ensuring a smooth transition and the continuation of their space missions. On the afternoon of March 17, 1992, the Soyuz TM-14 spacecraft launched from Earth with a crew that included Alexander and Klaus, a German who paid $24 million for his own trip to space. This also covered the cost of Sergei's journey back home. They took off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, aiming for the Mir space station. After a week, once the new team had settled in, Sergei prepared to return to Earth alongside Klaus and Commander Volkov. On March 25th, their Soyuz capsule safely landed back at Baikonur. When the hatch finally opened, a small crowd gathered around the spacecraft, watching as an exhausted astronaut slowly emerged. His skin was pale, almost ghostly. Faintly visible on his uniform were the red flag of the Soviet Union and the USSR letters in Cyrillic, marking him as the last representative of a country that no longer existed. After spending 10 months in the weightlessness of space, Sergei struggled to stand under Earth's gravity. Nearby men stepped in to help him to his feet as he took his first breath of fresh air in over 300 days. Someone wrapped a fur coat around his shoulders, and he was handed a bowl of hot broth, his first taste of earthly food in almost a year. As they flew back to Russia, he was eager to see his wife Yelena and his daughter Olga again. But when he landed, he found himself in a country that had changed a lot since he left. He felt like a stranger, almost like an alien. Even his hometown had changed its name from Leningrad to St. Petersburg while he was gone. But this wasn't the only thing that felt different. It wasn't just his outdated passport or the political shifts that surprised him. Sergei also noticed changes in his own body after being in space for so long. Some of these changes weren't all bad, though. For example, Sergei had technically time-traveled 20 milliseconds into the future. This might sound strange, but it has to do with the theory of relativity, which was explained by Einstein. Because he had been moving so fast and so far from Earth, time had actually passed differently for him. What do you think about time travel becoming a reality in the future? Like, comment, and subscribe for more.